Hello everybody and welcome to Nathan on Shuffle. I've got an exciting show here today. I like to do these fairly regularly. They're kind of fun to do. This is called New Music Shuffle. And the plan is, last year I did a few of these shows and they were kind of random. Like when I collected enough albums that I was interested in talking about, I'd do a show featuring those albums called New Music Shuffle. But this year, kind of as a revamp of the concept, I kind of want to do one at the end of each month as kind of like a highlight of the best releases that came out that month that I haven't covered yet, that haven't been reviewed. So that's basically what the format will be moving forward. So this one is basically a spotlight on some of the albums I thought were really notable that came out in January and February of 2022. And so I wanted to point your guys' attention to those. Most of the big releases that are really notable in the progressive sphere, they're big artists, they're ones that people request and are excited for, they're big bands that mean a lot to me. Those ones I'll give kind of their own album spotlight to. But there's a lot of albums I come across that are more obscure, that are bands that aren't quite as well known, and those are the ones that kind of become part of this New Music Shuffle show, where it's bands you may not have heard of or may not have known this music was out there, or you have heard of it but you haven't really checked it out yet, or you just want to hear someone else's opinion on an album you've discovered as well. So these are a few releases that really stood out to me as I've been listening, because I'm always listening to new music. I'm always trying to find the new band that I want to get into. It's kind of almost an addiction of trying to find that great new music that I haven't found yet. In that process, I find some really great stuff that I think you guys would enjoy as well. So today, the first thing I want to talk about, the first album up on the docket here, is from Black Country New Road, called Ants From Up There. This is one I've heard people talk about in the comments. They've asked if I'm going to be talking about this. It's kind of a notable release, not just in the prog realm, but in music in general, kind of in the indie rock kind of sphere as well, alternative rock, all of that stuff. They're kind of a notable new rock band that a lot of people are really interested in because they're very unique sounding and they have kind of this experimental kind of vibe to them. They draw from a lot of different influences. So I wouldn't really call them a prog band, but I think they would appeal to a lot of progressive rock audiences. And of course, I know there's a lot of question about like genre and should we even label things into different genres, because it's kind of too narrow of a definition and it kind of boxes things in when there's music out there that really transcends genre and can be described as several different things all at once. And I think this is a good representation of that, of an album that skirts the line between so many different genres and so many different things that it's hard to really pigeonhole and say, oh, this is prog, oh, this is indie rock, oh, this is post-rock. You know, there's so many different things going on and what's in the music here. Influences from jazz, bluegrass, indie, alternative, punk, post-rock, some prog stuff. It's just all baked into their sound and their vibe. It's just really eclectic and really interesting. And so they released their first album last year, which was a notable one that I heard a lot about, but I couldn't really get into it so much. But I decided to try again with the buzz surrounding this new release. And I kind of understood why it has so much buzz. It really connected with me. I think the style of it was a little bit more to my taste. I didn't like the first album as much because the vocals really were hard for me to get into. I know a lot of people love the vocalist, who I think since this album has left the group, so that's an unfortunate turn for them. But you know, he has kind of this talking style vocal that really wasn't my favorite, especially on the first album, but I feel like it's a little bit more melodic on this record and a little bit more enjoyable to my ears, so I wasn't as bothered with it through this listen. But the music behind it is so fascinating. It has an intro with these kind of cool horns that surround you, maybe even slightly off kilter and out of tune, but really interesting. And then it moves into Chaos Space Marine, one of my favorites, where it still has that horn, but there's kind of this jaunty, fun piano bit and some deep expressive vocals. Kind of switches between this dark and kind of off-kilter vibe, but then a soaring kind of anthemic kind of spirit as well. Throwback kind of jazzy, almost bluegrassy style in the mix. You know, really fun with the horns, and there's some violin. I like their they have a lot of different instrumentation and a lot of different, they have horns, they have violin, sometimes they have, different non-traditional instruments for rock music that really add some variety and some interest to me in the mix. I love Concord. It's kind of a slower build with some drumming and bass before there's that talking vocal style that I talk about, but some mandolin plucking and gentle horns, really sweet kind of laid back song that has a good groove to it but stays interesting because of the instrumentation. Kind of reminds me almost of like the adventurous kind of spirit of something like King Crimson or something like that. They're trying to explore new things, and I think it's really worth listening to for people who like kind of this more experimental side to music. Bread Song is another great track. I like the kind of the beginning of the album, the first half of the album maybe more than the second half, because the second half has these more longer expanded pieces that sometimes, they stay in the same kind of lane for a long time throughout the runtime of the song, and sometimes that can be a little bit boring to my ears at times. But really, if you listen closely, they're layering a lot of different great things in the music. They're layering this piano with this kind of guitar playing with violin and adding some horns and doing all of this stuff. There's even some flute playing and saxophone and something like The Place Where He Inserted the Blade, which is a really pretty song. And this layering of all these different sounds are really fascinating. I think that's kind of the post-rock side, where they kind of build this vibe and this atmosphere by having all these layers of instruments and things. And sometimes they just take their time to build this soundscape, which I had to kind of learn some patience to be able to listen to this and to really respect what they're doing with that. Because usually I listen to things that have a lot of stuff going on, or have harder edge, have like things switching up constantly. And this has some of that as well, but I think through some of these more expanded pieces towards the end, they're building upon layers, and I think it just creates a really cool atmosphere and spirit to the music. So it's a really cool album with a lot of cool vibes. Feels very modern and fresh. Feels like it's unique and different from anything else you hear. Sometimes you could argue that prog music is leaning a bit too hard on its influences, that they have that Yes sound, they have that Genesis sound, Jethro Tull sound. You can compare it to other artists and say, oh, this is the song that sounds like this band. But I think they do a great job of bringing in so many different influences into this melting pot of styles that you can't really pick out and say, okay, this is the song that sounds like this band. This is the song that sounds like this band. I think every track has its own unique flavor that doesn't really sound like anything else that at least I listen to regularly. So just so many great things to say about this record. So many great standout moments. I love Haldern with its jazzy vibe that really builds and has this kind of great somber vocals, and the ending is almost like from a horror movie. It's kind of a little bit off kilter, like I say. Really, really fascinating stuff. So please check this one out if you're at all interested in what I'm talking about. It's hard to describe really this kind of music, but when you hear it, you kind of understand what they're going for, and I think it provides for a really fascinating listen. So definitely one I'd recommend to those more adventurous listeners out there. Number 2, another album that's a little bit off the beaten path of what I typically talk about, that's maybe could be a bit extreme for some listeners, but I wanted to mention it because I think it's really well done. And this is Wilderun, I think is their name. Epigone is the name of the album. So this is a symphonic folk metal band from Boston, Massachusetts, founded in 2008. And what's really fascinating about them is they really have this kind of great combination of this folk kind of acoustic kind of sound, like you're almost being taken back to an older era, back in the woods and like kind of nature sounding. But they add in this kind of heavy vibe, these kind of darker tones, and this heavy aggressiveness to their music that really, it almost feels like those two styles wouldn't mix, but they do. And I think Opeth is really the best comparison to this group. They have a very big Opeth style vibe, and so that includes some heavy metal kind of growling sections as well, or these blast beats and these kind of heavy wall of sound kind of elements that can be very intense. So if you're not into the death metal vocals and the growling and all of that stuff, this may not be for you, which I typically am not into that either, and it takes a very special band to kind of make me appreciate that kind of sound. And I feel like here it's limited enough for me that I can handle it and understand that it's just intense for certain moments to kind of evoke certain moods and feels that they're going for in the music. But a lot of the music around it is very acoustic and folk inspired and has this beautiful vocal. Like there's a lot of clean vocals on this that are super beautiful. I love the vocalist. I think he does an incredible job, Evan Barry. Like the opening track, Exhaler, is really kind of acoustic, has some dense orchestral kind of flourishes and soft crooning vocals, but there's no growling, there's no like heaviness, but you do get it kind of starting with Wool Gatherer. It starts kind of continuing off with that light folky vibe before it shifts into that heavier kind of blast beat heaviness that kind of knocks you over and is kind of a big contrast to what's come before, blending that extreme metal with the more acoustic folk style. Definitely not my favorite when they get super heavy and intense and it's just like fast kind of drumming sound and you get a little bit of the growling and the kind of heavy Cookie Monster style vocals. But I kind of understand where they're going for, the intensity of the music and what their picture they're trying to paint. And they always kind of return it back to that more acoustic folky style that I appreciate, which is something Opeth frankly did a lot. So that's why that comparison seems pretty apt. Passenger is a really heavy song. It kind of has this section, it almost kind of has almost a bouncy pop vibe to the vocals in kind of the verse sections, but then it gets heavier and more extreme. And so it's kind of this dichotomy of two different kind of flavors here. Evan's voice is super clean and clear through parts of it. There's almost jazzy off-kilter chords and vibes before we get into the growling vocal section of the track. So it's really beautiful in sections, really heavy and intense in others, and just really interesting music that goes through several different moods and vibes. I like kind of the first several tracks. The Distraction kind of set of tracks that's towards the end, Distraction 1, 2, and 3, they kind of lean on that heaviness a bit more through those tracks, so maybe not as much of a favorite to me. I like kind of the more variety of those earlier tracks, like Wool Gatherer and Passenger and Identifier. But there's still a lot to mine from these. There's some cinematic, kind of big, grandiose vibes to the music. The last track, Distraction Dola, is just super dark and eerie and has this kind of really intense sound to it that's almost like it makes you feel a bit of anxiety, I think. And I think that's kind of the point. They're really trying to build a certain soundscape to make you feel a certain emotion and mood. And I think it works really fantastically well. So I really appreciated this album, even though it's off the beaten path of what I typically listen to. And I know a lot of subscribers and watchers of my channel might not appreciate the heavy vibe of that, and so you can skip it if you're not into the heaviness. This is definitely wouldn't be for you. But if you're a little bit more experimental, you like some of the heavier aspects of Opeth, but also like the folky kind of atmospheric acoustic vibe of their sound as well, I think this could be up your lane and is really well written, just fascinating music that I really appreciated. So now from that to another different extreme, another album that was really interesting to me that I listened to over the past couple months is Karfagen and the album Land of Green and Gold. And I apologize for any pronunciation. I'm trying my best, but I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it. But Karfagen is a brainchild of musician and composer Antony Kalugin, who's from the Ukraine, which I want to, express my sympathies to Ukraine. I know they're dealing with a pretty heavy, difficult situation. So hopefully Antony and any surrounding artists are doing okay, and the people there are able to get through this difficult time of what's going on in the Ukraine right now. But this is a fantastic album that's really beautiful. It's mostly instrumental. There's a couple of vocal tracks, but it really is that symphonic kind of style, very light and very pretty. Kind of like Camel is probably the best way to think of this. Camel vibes, a little bit of Yes kind of style. Flower Kings kind of go in this direction sometimes, but this is a little bit lighter even than that. It's very pastoral, very peaceful. It's kind of like, to me, like you're kind of just gently gliding through this kind of magical fantasy world, listening to this kind of pretty music around you as you kind of view these landscapes throughout this pastoral setting in a different land. That's kind of the vibe I get as I listen through some of this stuff. It's separated into chapters. Chapter 1, Land of Green, Kingfisher and Dragonflies opens with some acoustic guitar and piano before it sets the stage with these pastoral sounds. Land of Green Part 1 has that kind of laid-back style led by guitar, some atmospheric keys in the back before the keyboard kind of takes center stage and carries the melody. Once again, staying very mellow, staying very peaceful. So if you're looking for something that really is peaceful listening, that you can kind of listen to and kind of relax to, in my opinion, I think this is a great album. And there's little like jazzy flourishes throughout some of these tracks. Like Land of Green Part 2 has a kind of a laid-back jazz lounge kind of vibe to it with some jazzy keys, like almost a stand-up bass kind of style, and even some accordion I think I hear in the background here, some jazzy guitar licks. Really cool vibe to this, and it kind of sticks with that kind of vibe throughout the rest of this chapter. Land of Green Part 3 introduces almost some jazz fusion style with some saxophone. Pastoral, the track, of course, is a pastoral track. It kind of gives you that vibe with some acoustic guitar noodling. Land of Gold, more of that Camel vibe, more light symphonic kind of prog sections that are really peaceful and beautiful. And it's just, for someone like me that really appreciates the more symphonic style of prog, the Flower Kings, Kaipa, those style of bands, this is really nice and relaxing to me because it follows those, but without any sort of that more crunchy guitars and heaviness. That's not really heard here. It's more just you taking a journey. You get some vocals in Garden of Hope Part 1, light vocals towards the end of that track. Land of Jazz kind of is the final chapter. Once again, kind of the same symphonic prog with jazzy undertones. Some saxophone definitely adds to the jazzy vibe of these tracks. So really a cool kind of light album that I think could be enjoyable to people who like these types of symphonic artists, and really is a beautiful pastoral listen that I had a lot of fun listening to and felt like I could kind of mellow out and relax and almost meditate to. And this is the kind of music that I relax to. Maybe some people who aren't into the symphonic prog would find it too busy to relax to, but for me, when I'm primed towards that kind of sound, I think it provided for a good backdrop of music for me in kind of these moments where I'm just kind of vibing out to it and not looking for anything too demanding in my listening. So that was a cool album. So definitely check that one out if you're into that lighter kind of symphonic style, in the style of some more laid back Yes sounds, some Camel vibes, all of that is on display. So definitely worth checking out. So next we have kind of the final choice for this version of New Music Shuffle. This one is really great, and I recommend it to pretty much anyone out there who watches my channel and likes the types of albums I cover. This is Lalu and Paint the Sky. Now, Lalu is a prog metal French keyboardist composer of Chadrain and Hubi Meisel are some of the groups. And this is the latest album. This is their third album, I believe. There are two albums before this one. The two albums before, I haven't heard before. I've only heard this one because I heard such good things about it. But the first two albums supposedly are more metal sounding, more prog metal, where this one is a bit more embracing the prog sound, which definitely is up my alley. It's almost like bringing in kind of a Yes style into the progressive metal sound, So if you like bands like Ayreon or Dream Theater, but also like Yes and Genesis and kind of the classic prog artists, and like a little bit of even melodic kind of rock similar to things like Toto. That's the kind of vibe I get from this. It's very well produced. It has a lot of variety in the different tracks. Really great performances from all the musicians. They kind of bring on a whole host of different guest artists on the fold here. Jordan Rudess plays keyboards on a track. You got Steve Walsh from Kansas fame singing on a track. Vikram Shankar is playing keyboards on track. So there's different artists who are contributing here, but the core band is really awesome as well. Keyboards from Lalu, of course, Vivian Lalu, Jupe Walters on guitar and bass, Jelly Cardarelli on drums, and then Damian Wilson on vocals, who's kind of well known to people who love Arjen Lucason's work. He sings on a lot of Arion and Star One albums. Really a fantastic singer. I like his vibe because he has a power to his voice, but he also has a unique quality that kind of separates him from a lot of the pack of other prog metal singers, So it's definitely fun to hear his distinctive voice and his personality come through in this work. So to me, what makes this album a success is the great modern production, strong melodic hooks throughout, and just enough prog rock references to keep it varied and interesting. So that to me is kind of a great stew of things that makes for a great listen. Just every track is strong, opens up with Reset to Preset, which is kind of Yes-like in its atmosphere and soaring vocals before it morphs into something a bit more poppy with catchy hooks and great playing, like I was saying, like a Toto kind of track. I feel like there's a lot especially in some of these early tracks, that kind of give these pop hooks, but with progressive leanings around it and some light metal vibes, but not too much metal on board here. I think this would be a palatable listen for just about anyone, even if you're a little bit averse to the heavy metal side of the prog world. I don't think there's much here to worry about. Every track is solid. I love Paint the Sky, the title track. There's really two versions. There's Paint the Sky with vocals, and it's kind of a big proggy number right in the middle of the album with Steve Walsh guesting on vocals, which is really fun. Great joyous keyboard playing, technically great. There's an uplifting nature to the track, and then it ends with an instrumental song version of Paint the Sky, which is totally different. Almost has an 80s kind of Rush vibe, with some blues-inspired riffs and sections with different varied instrumentation, some Eastern sounding kind of acoustic guitar, 80s style synths. It really runs the gamut between a lot of different sounds. So these are highlights certainly of the album. Witness to the World and Lost in Conversation are very nice kind of shorter tracks, kind of giving more of a melodic rock type of vibe with only very light progressive feel. But Standing at the Gates of Hell is a great, cool jazz fusion style inspired piece, which adds a lot of variety and interest to the music. The Chosen Ones is really cool. It has a cool, expressive drum pattern before guitar and vocals enter. There's some great, impressive guitar sounds. A kind of a dreamy Pink Floyd style middle section, and then Jordan Rudess gives an incredible keyboard solo in that track. So it's just a really strong song that's a good representation of the album. I like We Are Strong, which is a great Yes-like atmosphere with almost Steve Howe inspired acoustic guitar over nature style sounds, and a powerful, almost Chris Squire-esque bass kind of kicks in with some vocals. Once again, great soaring melodies and great song that has some of those Yes and prog undertones. So it's kind of like they're trying to bring that Yes style, but add in a lot of melodic hooks and more pop-centric kind of vocals on top of it. And it really provides for a great combination, in my opinion. So it's a really great, strong album. Every piece is strong. There's no weak points, really, of the album, and it just sounds really great. The production is stellar, and the players are just all playing at expert levels. So really highly recommended album. So those are the albums that really interested me over the course of the last couple months. And there's a lot of albums coming out that will be likely candidates for the end of March. I'm going to do another show like this at the end of March. Catch up on probably a couple albums that came out in February that I just haven't had time to dive completely into yet. And then a couple of albums that come out in early March that are grabbing my interest and so forth. So hopefully you enjoy this series. I have a lot of fun recommending new and different albums. I hope that you guys enjoy it as well and find an album here that you might enjoy. It's a pretty varied list of different types of things. I know it's some of these albums can be a little bit polarizing to certain audiences, but the idea is to kind of promote and express interest in a lot of different things, and hopefully something strikes you. You go out and check one of these things out, and something is interesting to you. So I'll put links in the description to either go to their Bandcamp page to listen to some samples, or maybe to their website where it can point you in the direction of the music. I always try to put pieces of this on the Spotify playlist I have called New Music Shuffle. So if you go to that playlist, there's a lot of new prog music that I keep updated on there, but I try to include a selection from each of these albums just to give you a little taster and a sample to see if you're even interested in it. So hopefully you guys will enjoy that, and thank you guys for joining me, and hopefully you'll come in for the next one. And just keep enjoying the music. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on these albums, or any albums that came out in January and February that I missed, that I haven't talked about on the channel yet, that you've been enjoying, that maybe I'll listen to and pick up into the next New Music Shuffle at the end of March. So thank you guys so much. Please subscribe if you haven't yet. I do these types of shows, like I've been saying, monthly, but also all kinds of different prog content from week to week. You know, I do my prog news style shows. I do album spotlights on specific big notable prog albums. So please join me. I really would appreciate a subscribe or a follow or a like or any of those things. Find me on social media as well. I'll put up a graphic of the different places I'm on social media. And just thank you guys for joining me, and hopefully you have a great time out there enjoying the music that you've got going on. So I'll hopefully see you guys in a future video. Bye.